Under the sterile glare of airport lights, an old man stood still. Metal shimmered on his chest as the tide of travelers surged past, their eyes sliding over him like he was part of the architecture. Amid the shuffle of hurried shoes and the distant murmur of flight calls, the sharp tap of a cane on polished stone pierced through. Harold Bennett faced the boarding gate alone, hunched in a worn army jacket, gripping a duffel with one hand and his cane with the other. His posture sagged, like time itself had leaned too hard on him. People passed without pause, glancing, then forgetting, faces reabsorbed into screens and conversations. From behind a support pillar, another man observed, leaner than imposing, angular rather than broad. His dark jacket, scuffed and unbothered, looked more lived in than fashionable. Robert Downey Jr. stood with quiet gravity, back resting against the concrete, arms folded. Still, present. His gaze moved like a slow camera pan, tracking every flicker of tension at the gate. No posturing, no scowl, just an awareness that filled the space around him. Harold stepped forward, measured and gentle. "I have a seat on Flight 622 to Seattle," he said, voice weathered with age but steady. The woman behind the counter, Samantha, typed quickly, her perfectly manicured fingers betraying the rush to be done. "I'm sorry, sir. Your seat's been reassigned. The flight's overbooked," she rattled off, polished and impatient. Harold blinked once. "I booked it a month ago. Irritationde, no escalation. Just the calm insistence of someone who had waited long enough." Samantha smiled, the kind of smile that ends conversations. "The system bumped you automatically. Nothing we can do." Harold's duffel slipped a little, the strap dragging down his shoulder like it understood rejection. Downey shifted just enough to register, a breath caught between motions. His boots scraped faintly. His hands tightened around the strap across his chest. He didn't step forward yet, didn't interrupt the quiet war unfolding. But something behind his eyes stirred. The air was thick with stale coffee and recycled air. Passengers flowed past like a river around a stone, sidestepping Harold with polite irritation. A mother tugged her son's hand when he pointed at the old man's jacket, eyes wide at the faded patches that once meant something. "Don't stare," she murmured, her voice sharp and low, slicing through the sterile hum of the terminal. Robert Downey Jr.'s eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in focus. He took it all in. The way Harold's shoulders locked up but didn't cave. The way he swallowed the slight like a pill too familiar to taste anymore. In a building made for endless motion, Harold had become an anchor, silent, unmoving. A man whose past had once carved paths through fire and steel, now undone by a keystroke and a practiced smile. Robert exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that said, "Not now, but soon." "Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from today. And if this story speaks to you, don't forget to subscribe." The crowd surged forward, and Harold was pulled from the center like driftwood caught in a current. His cane echoed in irregular taps as he moved aside, disappearing from the gate as though he'd never been there. The overhead voice called for final boarding on Flight 622, but no one turned to look. He might as well have been wallpaper, an old man leaning against cold plaster, fading. Samantha didn't even glance back. Her smile had already reset, bright and blank, as she welcomed the next group. A family balancing coffee cups and clunky backpacks like a circus act. Her voice rose an octave, full of fake warmth and efficiency. Harold adjusted his duffel bag higher on his shoulder, wincing as old scar tissue tugged and protested. He shifted to his stronger leg. The cane shook slightly under the redistributed weight. His gaze drifted to the windows beyond the gate. There it was, the plane. Sleek, silver, gleaming, untouchable. He'd marched through jungles while death sang past his ears. He'd seen friends vanish in the space of a blink. But nothing had prepared him for the quiet cruelty of being forgotten, of standing still in a line that pretended he was never in it to begin with. A few feet away, Robert watched. The quiet weight in his stance deepened, the set of his shoulders less relaxed now. He didn't just see Harold anymore. He understood. This wasn't a fight of fists. It was a slow erosion, a battle where the wounds came from silence and systems, not from blows. At the counter, Samantha leaned toward her coworker, a young man too preoccupied with his tablet to notice the world around him. "Ignore him," she muttered. He's not going to make a scene. Probably doesn't have anyone waiting anyway. Her voice floated with the easy cruelty of indifference. The young man beside her chuckled, eyes still glued to his tablet. Yeah, just an old guy. He'll vanish in a second. Robert Downey Jr.'s fingers flexed slightly at his side. No fist. Just a ripple through the tendons in his forearm. The worn leather of his jacket gave a quiet creak under the tension. Not yet. He needed to watch it unfold, to see just how invisible they thought Harold really was. Let the truth land, undistorted. Harold shifted again. His jaw clenched, but the pain stayed quiet. 20 minutes passed. Flight 622 swallowed family after family, sharp suits and worn sneakers alike, all pulled smoothly into the fuselage. Harold stood to the side, untouched by the current, like a stone in the path of a river. Someone brushed past him, muttering irritation as if Harold were luggage someone forgot to move. At the back, Robert unfolded from the pillar. No drama, just momentum. His arms fell to his sides, boots heavy against the tile. One step, measured, deep, and the sound echoed, ignored by most, but charged with gravity for those who felt rather than heard. His gaze didn't leave Harold. The gate agents closed in on the final tasks, tidying, counting, tapping at screens. Samantha avoided looking up. Her fingers danced across the keyboard in the universal language of pretending to be busy. Harold, still upright, still polite, cleared his throat. Any updates, miss? No seats, Samantha said, voice clipped like a slammed door. You'll have to wait for rebooking. Harold nodded once. Small. Too small to be seen by anyone not paying attention. Robert's shoulder moved first, then his jaw set. The time for silence had expired. He stepped forward, not rushed, not loud. The kind of movement that draws attention not by sound, but by weight. His boot struck again, a metronome of purpose. People turned. Some felt it before they saw it, the shift in atmosphere, like static before a storm. He reached the counter with the calm tension of someone used to making rooms quieter simply by entering. No words yet, just presence. And presence, when it carried weight, didn't need to speak first. Samantha looked up, distracted by the movement. Her practiced smile flickered back on, a reflex more than a thought, until her eyes met his. Robert Downey Jr.'s gaze held, calm and steady, but with the unmistakable weight of a man who measured more than words. Is there a reason this man isn't on his flight? He asked, voice even, each syllable deliberate. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried like a slow drum beat in a quiet room. Samantha straightened, blinking too quickly. Sir, the flight is full. He'll be rebooked shortly, she replied, her tone coated in polite insulation. We're doing our best. Robert didn't flinch. He leaned in slightly, not to threaten, but to bring gravity closer. He paid for that seat, didn't he? A pause, too long. Samantha's fingers twitched on the counter. Yes, but the system doesn't bleed, Robert cut in softly, his voice slicing clean through the excuse. His eyes dropped briefly to the worn metals on Harold's chest, then back up, clear and unmoved. Around them the air shifted. Conversations thinned. A few people stopped pretending not to notice. Phones were raised quietly, discreetly, capturing something raw and rare, something that didn't belong to airports anymore. Samantha's smile faltered at the corners. I'll see what I can do, she murmured, ducking behind her monitor as though it could shield her. Robert stepped back, unhurried, his arms folded again. He didn't look at Harold. He didn't have to. His presence alone redrew the perimeter, forged a small space of dignity around a man who had been quietly erased. The battle wasn't over, but the ground had shifted. Moments later, Harold stood alone at the gate, a new boarding pass in hand. Row 34, back of the plane, near the restroom. No apology, no glance. Just a slip of paper, like an afterthought. He adjusted his grip on the duffel bag. His cane struck a quiet, uneven beat as he made his way toward the jet bridge. Robert followed, distant, steady, not looming, just present. His eyes fixed on Harold's back, not in pity, but in recognition. Inside the plane, the air buzzed with the noise of people settling in. Overhead, bins banged shut. Seatbelts clicked. Laughter trickled in from the front, where glasses clinked behind a curtain Harold would never pass through. He moved down the narrow aisle with care, whispering soft apologies every time his cane bumped a seat or his bag brushed an armrest. No one looked up. No one shifted. Harold became part of the pre-flight noise, an obstruction to be tolerated, not acknowledged. Near the back of the plane, his cane caught the edge of a seat. He stumbled. The duffel slipped from his hand, thudding against the carpet. Something metallic clinked and skidded a few inches before stopping. No one looked up. No one moved aside. Harold became part of the pre-flight static, an obstacle, not a person. Near the back of the plane, his cane caught on the edge of a seat. He stumbled. The duffel slipped from his hand, landing with a soft thud. A small metal object slid out, skittering across the carpet until it came to rest beside Robert Downey Jr.'s boot. He crouched slowly, not just from age but from memory. The object was worn, the edges dulled by time. A distinguished service cross. He turned it over. Harold J. Bennett, Pleiku Province, Vietnam, 1970. The noise faded. Engines, chatter, the overhead bins slamming, muted. Robert stared at the metal, fingers tightening. Pleiku, a letter folded 1,000 times. His mother's hands trembling. His brother's words etched in ink. A man, only Bennett, had dragged him out from hell. No first name, just that. Robert's jaw clenched. Harold reached for the bag, moving stiffly. "Sorry about that," he murmured. It wasn't shame, just old pain, expertly carried. Robert stood and handed the metal back without a word. Their hands brushed, calloused, real. Harold tucked it away, slow and careful, like returning a relic to a sacred place. Then he looked up. Their eyes met, his surprised, Robert's unreadable. "You all right, son?" Harold asked. Software measured, heavy with something neither of them had words for. Robert held the old man's gaze a moment longer, as if trying to read not just his face, but every year etched into it. "Your name's Bennett?" His voice cracked slightly, soft and raw. "That's right," Harold answered, brow creased with quiet confusion. "You served in Vietnam?" Robert's words came slowly, as if each one was being pulled from somewhere long buried. Harold's eyes changed, a slight shift, a remembering. "I did. Pleiku Province, mostly." Robert let out a breath through his nose. Long, steady. His hands dropped to his sides, open, exposed, a posture he hadn't worn in decades. "You knew a Marine. Big mouth. Bad jokes. Wheelin' Norris?" Harold froze. His hand gripped the cane tighter. His mouth parted, the name unlocking a corridor in his memory he hadn't walked in years. "I remember," he said softly. "God, yes, that kid never shut up. Not even when the sky was falling." His voice thickened. "I pulled him out once. Thought we'd lost him." Robert's throat caught on something that hadn't been there a second ago. He didn't speak, just nodded, slow, deliberate, while somewhere behind them, the plane shuddered in preparation to take flight, perhaps towards something neither of them knew they still needed. The engines hummed beneath them. The plane leveled out over the dark Midwest. Around them, passengers settled into routines, headphones, neck pillows, eyes closed. But in the cramped last row, Harold Bennett sat upright, his hands folded over his cane. Beside him, Robert leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees, head bowed. They said nothing. The silence wasn't awkward. It was full, pressurized, alive with something unnamed. Robert turned the memory in his mind like a jagged stone. He could still see the letter, his brother's uneven handwriting, the way his mother's hands had trembled every time she opened it. There had been a name in that letter, a man, no rank, no title, just Bennett. The one who'd gone back for Wheelin' when no one else did. And now that man was sitting right there, older, weathered, but unmistakably real. "You kept it," Robert said at last, voice nearly lost in the hum of the cabin. Harold turned. "The medal?" Robert nodded once. Harold's gaze drifted to the aisle, where a stewardess pushed a rattling cart forward. "Because I didn't ask for it," he said quietly, "and because some things you don't let go of, no matter how much they weigh." The words settled between them, unmoving. Robert shifted slightly, the leather of his jacket creaking under the strain. "You think saving lives makes you lighter?" he asked, the question rising from a place deep and smoky. Harold let out a dry laugh. Gravelly, short, it didn't touch his eyes. "No," he said, "it makes you heavier, but you figure out how to carry it." Robert said nothing. His chest rose and fell slowly, deliberately, as if sinking with something ancient inside him. He didn't need to answer. The truth had already landed, too large to explain, too intimate to deny. His hands rested on his knees, fingers slightly curled, as if trying to hold the weight of the moment without dropping it. Harold shifted in his seat, slow and measured. "He talked about you," he said quietly. "Every damn night. Said you were sharp, smarter than him." Robert blinked slowly. "Said you had this way of seeing things, like you already knew how they'd turn out." Robert's throat moved, trying to clear something thick. "He said that?" Harold nodded. "Said you could catch a snake blindfolded and have it cooked before he found his boots?" A thin smile creased Harold's face, peeling back the years for a breath of youth. For a second, he wasn't just the old man with a cane. He was the one who'd been there. Robert chuckled, barely, a sound so rare it startled even him. The plane trembled with a patch of turbulence, but neither man moved. They stayed anchored, grounded not by altitude, but by memory. "You saved him," Robert said eventually. His voice was steady now, rooted. "I tried," Harold replied. "We both did." The silence that followed wasn't hollow. It pulsed, full of something not lost, but finally found. Maybe too late, but found. Above them, the plane surged through the dark, carving lines into sky no one else would see. And in the back row, two men sat side by side, each bearing the unshakable weight of memory. For once, it felt like enough. The wheels hit the tarmac with a jolt. The cabin rattled. Overhead, bins shuddered, and passengers stirred from half-sleep, reaching for bags and blinking away dreams. Robert didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed on the back of the seat ahead. Beside him, Harold shifted, hand wrapping around the cane, with practiced steadiness. There was no rush, no one rushing them. They weren't part of that world anymore, the scramble for the door world. They belonged to the quiet now. When the aisle cleared, Robert stood, leather creaking softly with the motion. He waited while Harold hoisted the duffel, then fell into step beside him. No words, just presence. They walked together through the tunnel of fluorescent lights and jet-lagged strangers, headed toward the terminal, and whatever waited past it. Two silhouettes, each carrying a different war, walked side by side through the quiet terminal. Near a dim cafe tucked behind a newsstand, Robert paused. He reached out, his hand gently brushing Harold's elbow, a small but intentional gesture. "Sit," he said, voice roughened by memory, not malice. Harold hesitated. Pride flickered in his eyes, but he nodded. They sank into a corner booth. Around them, the world blurred into white noise. Cups clinking, murmured phone calls, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Robert returned from the counter with two black coffees, thick, steaming. He placed one carefully in front of Harold, like setting something sacred down. Neither man reached for it. They just sat. The silence was full, not empty. The kind of silence that fills a room with more than words ever could. "I meant what I said," Robert finally spoke, voice low, almost drowned by the hum around them. Harold glanced at him. "About what?" "About doing something," Robert said. His fingers wrapped around the coffee cup. His knuckles whitened under the pressure. "Not just for you, for all of you." Harold stared into the coffee like it might answer back. The liquid surface reflected not lights, but something older. Wounds. Ghosts. "Most people don't remember," he said. The bitterness didn't sting. It lingered. Faint, but there. Robert leaned forward, elbows on the table, his posture heavy with intent. "Maybe not most people," he said, "but some of us do, and some of us can do more than remember." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper, slid it across the table. It stopped in front of Harold, who looked at it but didn't touch it. "What's this?" "Something we're building," Robert said. "Veteran outreach, flights, recognition. Not the kind you read off a teleprompter, the real kind. Harold's fingers brushed the paper's edge, tentative. Why me? Robert's eyes didn't blink. Because you never asked for it, and because you carried it anyway. Harold exhaled. Long, slow. A release held back for years. The world buzzed on around them, oblivious. But in that booth, something shifted, like old tectonic plates deciding finally to move. Harold didn't speak. He just nodded. Once. Heavy, like a man lifting something sacred. And Robert understood. That nod was enough. For now. The conference room on the executive floor was a glass-walled island, floating above an endless grid of runways and taxiing planes. Morning light sliced through the windows, pooling in sterile streaks across a polished table where department heads and senior managers sat in subtle unrest. No agenda, no email, just a summons. They fidgeted in leather chairs, murmured in low tones, glanced at watches. The murmuring stopped when Robert Downey Jr. walked in. He didn't storm. He didn't need to. The atmosphere shifted around him, like air thickening before a storm. Simple black jacket, worn jeans, boots that had seen things. He carried a single black folder. No laptop, no assistant, no flair. Just purpose. He walked to the head of the table and set the folder down. Didn't open it. Didn't sit. He stood there silent, long enough for the silence to stretch, to coil, until every person leaned forward slightly, drawn in without realizing it. "We're not here to talk about profits," he said at last, his voice low, the kind that doesn't need volume to command a room. "We're not here to review growth charts or regional data." He scanned the room slowly. His gaze landed, held, and moved on. No one escaped it. "We're here because 2 days ago, one of your passengers, Harold Bennett, was denied the seat he paid for." A shift rippled down the table. Someone adjusted their glasses. A throat cleared. "He was ignored," Robert said. "Dismissed, and no one thought twice." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The silence did the lifting for him. "Harold Bennett is a Vietnam veteran, a man who carried lives through gunfire, a man who never came back asking for statues or speeches." He reached into the folder, pulled out a photograph, faded, scanned, but clear. A distinguished service cross. He held it up, the metal grainy in the image, the name stamped into its back. "He never asked for much," Robert said, "but you took something anyway." He let the photo speak for a beat too long. "You took his seat and nearly erased his name in the process." In the back corner, Samantha sat frozen. Recognition bloomed across her face like a sudden winter. No one looked at her, but everyone felt it. She remembered now. The man at the gate, alone, quiet, fading into the background as she smiled past him and handed out rehearsed lines like candy. She'd pushed him aside with a policy, a script, a smile. Robert's gaze swept the room again. "This isn't about shame," he said, voice steady. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone." His tone softened, but didn't lose its edge. "I'm here because Harold Bennett isn't the only one. He's just the one you saw." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping, each word like a fuse being lit. "Every time you rush someone out the door, every time you hide behind the system, because it's faster, you lose something, and you won't even notice it's gone until it's too late." He let that linger, then stepped back. "We changed that. Starting today." From the side entrance, Harold walked in, slow, steady, his jacket pressed. His medals caught the morning light, not flaunting, just present. The room stood. No prompt, no announcement, just reflex. Harold didn't hold a speech. He didn't need to. He spoke plainly, softly. He talked about the ones who didn't come home, about what it meant to be seen and then forgotten, about the quiet tax survival extracts. When he finished, the room wasn't quiet out of tension. It was quiet because they understood. Maybe for the first time, they understood what they'd nearly lost and what they had to carry forward if they ever wanted to be worthy of the seats they took so easily. Outside, morning light stretched across the tarmac in long shadows. A crowd had gathered near the hangar, veterans in uniform, airline staff in navy and silver, Reporters with notepads half raised. They stood in loose rows, facing a simple stage set up just beyond the runway. A white banner hung behind it, taut in the breeze, shielding something just out of view. The air smelled like jet fuel, new paint, and early autumn. Near the platform, Harold stood, hand resting on his cane. His jacket sharp, his medals clean but quiet. Less about pride, more about memory. Beside him, Robert stood as he always did. No spectacle, no polish. Just present, just real. His eyes scanned the crowd, not to command it, but to make sure. That quiet, practiced way men do when they've carried too many moments that mattered too much. His gaze landed everywhere and nowhere at once, confirming alignment more than seeking attention. He didn't smile. He didn't have to. His presence held the gathering together like a silent frame around a painting, subtle but irreplaceable. The crowd's murmur faded as Robert Downey Jr. stepped forward. His boots made a soft grind on the tarmac. No rush, no spectacle. He didn't go to a podium, didn't shuffle notes, didn't adjust the mic. He just stood. The microphone hovered inches from his mouth, and when he spoke, his voice was low and calm, yet reached across the open air like a stone skipping clean across water. "We're not here for headline," he said. He paused. "We're not here for publicity." Silence wrapped around his words like insulation. "We're here because men like Harold Bennett carried more than medals, more than memories. They carried each other. And when they came home, they didn't ask for anything." His eyes flicked to Harold. They just lived with the weight. He nodded once, sharp and respectful, a gesture so spare it cut through ceremony like a blade through cloth. "Today," he continued, "we honor that weight and the miles they walked alone, because we weren't paying attention." He turned toward two engineers at the edge of the hangar. They moved as one. With a tug, the white banner dropped, revealing a gleaming Boeing 737, pure white and navy under the early sun. But that wasn't what stilled the crowd. Painted across the fuselage, a silhouette of a lone soldier, saluting beneath a flowing American flag. The image wasn't flashy, it was honest, striking in its simplicity, and beneath it, in bold, unadorned letters, Harold Bennett, a legacy of courage. The crowd gasped, not because they were told to, but because they couldn't help it. Harold's lips parted slightly. No words came. His hand gripped the cane tighter. For a long beat, he simply stared. The painted soldier mirrored in his eyes. Behind them, 1,000 memories shifting like smoke. Robert took a step back. No words, no hand on the shoulder, just space. Space earned long ago, finally offered. No flashes, no shouted questions. Just the steady wind brushing over the concrete, the hum of idle engines, and the subtle shift of a crowd that knew somehow they were witnessing something heavier than any headline. Harold stepped forward. Then again. In the front row, the soldiers straightened their backs. Airline staff followed suit, hands instinctively placed over hearts. Robert stood still, eyes unreadable. But something behind them tightened. Something close to pride, if not quite the word itself. No speeches, no banners. Just a man and the plane that would carry his story higher than any uniform ever had. Harold raised one trembling hand and touched the cool curve of the fuselage. His fingers lingered, like a prayer pressed into steel. Behind him, Robert lowered his head, just once. A quiet gesture. A salute not taught, only earned. The weeks that followed didn't race forward. They moved slower, like the world had shifted its rhythm. Inside Taylor Aviation, things began to change. Small at first, almost invisible, but real. New signs at check-in. Veterans first. Not loud, just firm. Boarding protocols were rewritten. Training sessions launched. Not out of PR, out of something closer to repentance. And at the heart of it all, quiet, focused, was Samantha. Not the woman who'd once smiled past Harold Bennett, not anymore. That shame, the one that once burned in her face, had rooted into something sharper, stronger. She volunteered, joined the veteran outreach initiative Robert had built from the ground up. She stayed late, redrafting manuals, spoke to new hires, not from a podium, but eye to eye. She talked about dignity, memory, debt, not with grand gestures, with repetition, intention, the kind of change that actually sticks. One afternoon, Robert stood outside the training room, arms folded, leaning into a cold steel beam. Through the glass, he watched Samantha speaking to a new batch of recruits. Her hands moved in clean lines, outlining policies that hadn't existed a month ago. He didn't walk in, didn't interrupt, didn't congratulate. That wasn't the point. Growth, he knew, didn't need applause. It lived in what people did when no one was watching. And inside that room, Harold's name was never mentioned. It didn't have to be. His story lived in every word. One of the younger recruits raised a hand, a flicker of skepticism in his voice. Is it really necessary? I mean, it's just a flight. Samantha didn't blink. She looked him dead in the eye. It's never just a flight, she said. Not when you're carrying someone's whole lifetime with you. From the hallway, Robert watched. A faint smile ghosted across his lips. Not amusement, but something that leaned closer to respect. He pushed off the steel column and turned away, his boots echoing down the corridor in slow, steady rhythm. No words, no need. Samantha had it now. She carried it. The weight of it, the story, the responsibility, stitched into her stance, her tone, her stillness. Outside, sunlight slid across the fuselage of the Boeing 737 parked at the gate. Harold Bennett, a legacy of courage, glinted against a cloudless blue sky. That plane would fly veterans home now. No charge, no questions, no fight for dignity. Robert paused at the window for a beat, arms at his sides, just watching. No ceremony, no applause. Just a quiet nod, almost to himself. And then he disappeared into the crowd, because he knew change didn't come in declarations. It came in steady hands. Carrying heavy things, farther than anyone expected. The engines hummed low as the boarding bridge pulled away. Harold Bennett stood at the foot of the stairs, staring up at the jet that bore his name. The rising sun gilded the metal, made the letters nearly too bright to face. He didn't move. Not yet. His hand rested on the rail, cane tucked beneath his arm, duffel hanging from his shoulder. It wasn't the climb that slowed him. It was the meaning of that first step. Behind him, a small crowd waited. Airline crew, veterans, a few bystanders who knew this wasn't about travel. This was about return. Among the watchers, leaning against a concrete barrier near the edge of the observation deck, Robert Downey Jr. stood, arms folded, head slightly tilted, his face unreadable. His eyes locked on Harold, willing him forward, saying nothing, but meaning everything. Harold moved, each step measured, steady, his cane tapping gently on the metal stairs. Halfway up, he paused, turned. His eyes swept across the tarmac, the terminal, the people, the sky. Then he raised one hand, just a short wave. Not dramatic, not ceremonial, just acknowledgement. A thank you for those still willing to bear witness. Robert returned the gesture, a small lift of his hand, barely noticeable, but heavy with everything that didn't need saying. Behind them, the airport resumed its rhythm, engines revving, announcements echoing through the halls. But for a breath, a heartbeat, everything stilled. Harold disappeared inside the aircraft. The door hissed shut behind him, sealing him into something larger than a cabin, larger than a flight, a vessel built of bolts and wings and silent promises. Robert stayed, long after the others drifted away. He stood by the glass, watching as the engines spun to life, stirring dust and leaves into small spirals around the wheels. The 737 pulled back from the gate, unhurried, almost reverent, and when it reached the runway, when the nose lifted and the wheels kissed gravity goodbye, Robert pressed a hand to the window. No fanfare, no prayer, just touch, the kind that tethers you to something you're not ready to let go of. The plane climbed, higher, steadier. The words on its side caught one last flash of sun before vanishing into blue. Robert let his hand fall. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He stood, still, because some debts aren't paid back. They're carried, through time, through miles, through skies, and they're passed forward, Not with noise, but with weight. To anyone willing to remember. If you enjoyed this story, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories.